And today, Senator Marco Rubio grilling Secretary of State Clinton about the deteriorating security for Americans in Libya, long before the September 11th attack. Were his questions answered by the Secretary of State? We spoke with Senator Rubio a short time ago.
The part that I wanted to focus in on was how information flows within the State Department. How is it possible that you have meetings with the Prime Minister, you visit Libya, the issue of insecurity at the consulate isn't raised to a level of alert? How is it possible that you're the sitting Secretary of State and your staff isn't coming to you and saying, we have a problem, you know, there's been 200 attacks, the Brits have pulled out of Benghazi? How is it possible that there weren't meetings convened specifically about this topic, given all the flow of information? The answer is either those meetings did happen or they didn't, and we've got a problem within the State Department in terms of how information flows. So to me, it's not just about assigning blame, it's about figuring out what went wrong internally so that this never happens again.
Did you get that answer?
Well, I think what we found out was that Secretary Clinton met with the Prime Minister and the issue of security was touched, but not deeply. And again, I don't understand how that's possible.
Was that in October of 2011 when she was in Libya, or was it?
Both. I mean, in October of 2011, she visited Libya, and then again in March of 2012, the Prime Minister came to Washington. And on both occasions, she admitted that she talked to him about security and the security situation. So clearly there was awareness at that level, at the Secretary level of the Department of State, that we have a serious security problem, that we were counting on militias, for example, to provide for the consulate, or to provide in Benghazi what normally is the responsibility of an organized government to do. And I think that's what she kind of told us today. In fact, I think in her answer to one of my questions, she said that these militias in the past had proven reliable. I think in hindsight, obviously, that's not the case. But again, the point is that you take the totality of the questions that were asked, here's what's very clear. You had all this information coming in from different sources to the State Department that basically said Libya is dangerous, Benghazi in particular is dangerous. In fact, it's so dangerous that other countries have pulled their mission out. But the United States did not respond to that with sufficient enough security or an extraction plan to get our people out of there. And you know, at the end of the day, that's just bad decision making.
She said a couple times, both here and I think on the House side, that one of the problems that the State Department was having is that they had either asked for money and it hadn't been authorized, but that there was some sort of financial problem, or she wanted to transfer from one particular area of the State Department to another, and that there are impediments doing that. Was she correct that that they have been underfunded for security?
Well, two separate issues. As far as money that's already been allocated, if there are impediments to that money being moved from one use to another, we need to look at that. I'm not sure that makes sense to do that. The money's already been allocated.
So she might be right about that one.
But the second part is they're not having enough money for security. Well, again, here's what happened. You had these requests for security. No one came to the Hill and said, we have these specific risks in Libya. Libya is very dangerous, and we're going to have to close down the consulate. We're going to have to close down the Benghazi place unless you provide more money for security there. Look, at the end of the day, it's about resource allocation. The truth is, they didn't believe. They didn't believe that they needed more upgrades in Benghazi. In fact, if you look at some of the statements they made in the early hours, in the early days after the attack, they talked about how heavily fortified it was, how much security they'd invested in there. So they bragged about how much they had put in there initially. I mean, now in hindsight, it's clear they didn't have nearly enough. So that wasn't their posture at the time. Their posture at the time was not, give us more money or something really bad is going to happen. And that may be their posture now in hindsight. And ultimately, I mean, this is a time of limited resources, but they clearly didn't press the case that we were in danger of something like this happening.
Was she candid?
Well, I mean, like she tried to answer questions, to the questions that were asked. I think time will tell. Time will tell whether some of the things she said bear out to be true or not. I mean, these things have a way of flushing themselves out. To say the opposite, I'm not going to sit here and accuse the Secretary of lying. I'm going to tell you I'm concerned about some of her answers. The reason why I'm concerned about some of her answers, I still do not understand how it can be that a high-profile place like Libya, with the amount of dangerous situations that had already occurred, with all the information coming into the government, to the U.S., that in Libya, not only was it a dangerous place, but Benghazi in particular was dangerous, and that there were Islamist, fundamentalist, radical elements that were organizing and training in the vicinity. How with all of that out there, someone didn't look at all that and say, we have a problem we need to address very quickly. We need to provide more security for the consulate, perhaps maybe even close it for a period of time. We need to have a military asset on standby to extract people. Why there weren't more resources pressed? She was clearly aware that Libya was a very dangerous place. And I think as time goes on, we are going to learn more about who knew what. Here's what I don't believe. I don't believe that the only people who were aware of what a bad situation it was were the mid-level people that resigned. I think that it was clear from her testimony today that she was aware of how Libya was, although obviously, you know, she says that there's no way she could have known that it was going to turn into this.
All right, and if I get right from what you said, is that your main concern was the process of information and to make sure we find out what happened, how it happened, so that it doesn't happen again.
Only one of two things could have happened. Either the information didn't get to where it needed to go, or the information got to where it needed to go, but the response was not appropriate. Both are bad.
And we investigate that so that it doesn't happen again.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. The second, there was some questioning, not by you, by others, about Ambassador Rice and about how the administration disseminated information in the hours and days and weeks that followed. Do you have any problem with or any question about?
Sure.
And why is that important now?
Well, it's important for two reasons. Number one, I knew other senators were going to handle those questions, and they did a very good job of raising that issue. John McCain made a great point today when he said people don't bring RPGs and they don't bring the kind of weaponry that was used in this attack to a spontaneous demonstration. But here's why it's relevant, because the Secretary went today and said, well, why does this matter? Here's why it matters. Because when they put out word that this was not a terrorist attack, it was sprung out of a spontaneous uprising, it furthered the narrative that somehow Al-Qaeda was in disarray, that we had, by the elimination of bin Laden, had made this extraordinary reduction in the risk in the area. As it turns out, not only was that not true in Libya, but we're now seeing it's not true in other parts of North Africa as well. And the fundamental question is, did the administration really believe that? Because if they did, they badly miscalculated. Or did they know it wasn't true, but for political reasons did not want that narrative out there? In essence, their narrative was that they were winning the war on terror, they were eliminating these groups, and they were no longer capable of carrying attacks against the U.S. It was one or the other. Either they were wrong, they assessed wrong that radical terrorists were not capable of carrying out an attack, or they knew that they could, but they didn't want to admit it because it went against their political narrative during an election season. So it's one of those two, and we're not happy with either one.